My name's Ian Christie, and I'm going to kick off this session. I think I'm described as a film historian accurately in the program. One of the things I try to do as a film historian is to make people aware of the areas of film history that they don't know about but should know about. And of course 3D is the prime example of that. There's a lot more 3D history than even people interested in 3D today realize. And for me, this session is a bit of a dream come true. It's very short, but it's an extraordinary first as far as 3D history is concerned, because back in 1951, the Festival of Britain was supposed to regenerate Britain after the war. It was supposed to mark the end of post-war austerity and the beginning of the new Britain. So they built a big exhibition site right here on the South Bank. Everything you see on the South Bank pretty much is a relic of the Festival of Britain. One of the big attractions in the Festival of Britain was the telekinema. The telekinema is the first Mark I of the NFT, BFI South Bank, which we're in today. And the big attraction in the telekinema was, obviously, 3D. A program of 4 3D films, which was seen by at least 500,000 people. And all of those photos you find all over the web of 1950s people sitting in rows with their glasses on, most of those photos actually come from the telekinema, I've discovered. But nobody's seen the films. The films that were so popular, so attractive, so interesting, and received unanimously good reviews have kind of disappeared from view. But the National Film Archive, the BFI National Film Archive, of course, has preserved them. They were actually co-productions between the BFI and, in 2 cases, the National Film Board of Canada. And with the help of Jan Fall, who I hope is here, good, Jan, without whom not, who works in the National Film Archive, Jan has rescued this really precious 3D history and has got it to the point where it was almost ready to show digitally. And thanks to the 3D Summit, we've actually managed to cross the bridge into DCP land. So for the very first time since 1951, you're going to see some of the original Festival of Britain films in digital 3D. Let me explain quickly what the films are. We only got time for extracts, so this will give you a sense of what those audiences saw in 51. First of all, there's a kind of jokey documentary called A Solid Explanation. The less said about that, perhaps the better. But it's very typical of British humor in the post-war period, sort of precursor of the Goon Show and modern panel games. More interesting in many ways is a little documentary called Eye on the Ball. Now, for anybody who's English here, you will immediately recognize the voice of John Arlott, who was one of the great British sports commentators. It's a very nice, dry commentary as he demonstrates just what 3D can bring to showing a little bit about the technique of football and cricket. There's more to the film, but I've just given you these 2 episodes. And then comes what is in many ways the most exciting item. This is a legendary film. It's one of 2 films that Norman Mclaren, the great animator, made specially for the occasion. Mclaren was Scottish. He had worked through the 30s with John Grierson. He helped to found the National Film Board of Canada with its great tradition of animation. And Mclaren was always interested in new techniques. He was the man who began painting on film, electronic soundtracks, manufactured soundtracks, oscilloscopes. In one of the films he made, he photographed an oscilloscope and used that to generate a 3D image. What you're going to see here is something different. It's a drawn, hand-drawn animated film. And it's called, appropriately, Now is the Time to Put on Your Glasses. Maybe it was shown first, I'm not sure, in 51. And the last item is from a documentary called Royal River. It's got a commentary by a well-known poet of the period, John Pudney. And you'll see why I'm showing it to you when we reach the last image. It brings us, in a sense, back home. Just one thing to add to that, very hasty introduction. These films, after they were shown at the Festival of Britain, toured Europe. I don't know how many places they went, but I do know they reached Paris. And for any of you who studied film theory, the name André Bazin will mean something. Believe it or not, André Bazin saw the program in 1952 in Paris and wrote an ecstatic piece saying, this is the future of cinema. Many have said that. Actually, I should tell you that the end of that story is in '56, he said, well, the revolution didn't happen. But he blamed it, quite correctly, on CinemaScope. But that's a long and other story, and I'm sure there'll be a chance to talk about that later. I'm going to shut up now to make sure that Buzz has the time that he needs for the second half of this show. So we're just going to show the 4 extracts, and I hope you'll share my sense of excitement that we're bringing these back to their original home.
Hi, everybody. My name is Buzz Hayes, and I'm going to talk a little bit about history here, too. History is very important to me in 3D. I've been involved with it for a very long time. Actually, while I'm talking, if you guys in the booth don't mind putting up that first image, I'll just talk over that. And you can turn all the lights down. They don't need to see me. My wife says I'm a little too three-dimensional. But my history of 3D starts in various places. My first personal interest in 3D, you'll need your glasses for this, by the way. My personal interest in 3D started when I saw House of Wax as a child, and of course I had a Viewmaster like most people probably did in this room. That piqued my interest in it. Professionally, I didn't get involved with it until the 1980s when I was involved with the restoration of Dial M for Murder, but I was bitten by the bug. But this photograph in particular just kind of came to my attention recently. This is a photograph, a 3D portrait from 1863. This is an American Civil War general that I'm not sure too many of you are familiar with, but you will be in a minute. What's important about these photographs for me is a few different things. For one, of course, 3D, as Dr. Brian May can point out, 3D has been around for a very long time. Photography predates a lot of what we know in cinema, certainly. And 3D photography came about largely at the dawn of photography itself. So there are a lot of great images. Here's the second image from the same collection. These particular images were official portraits by a gentleman named Matthew Brady, who in America is basically attributed as the first photojournalist. He was tasked with making all the official portraits of various government officials, of which some of those include, for example, President Abraham Lincoln. This particular gentleman, however, has great significance to me personally because this is my great-great-great-grandfather, General Alexander Hayes. And his official portraits were actually done in 3D 150 years ago. So I think it's pretty remarkable. I guess my personal history has stretched farther back than I ever expected. But anyway, I wanted to show you these images. Now, what's interesting about this particular image, thanks to Bob Zeller, who's a historian on the Civil War, he found this image for me, but the left and right eyes were in 2 different collections. So it wasn't even apparent that it was a 3D image until we found those 2 different images. So I had to do a little restoration work to it. But anyway, that's my great-great-great-grandfather. Now, flashing forward a little bit, got a couple more things here to show you. There's a very important exhibit that's in your midst here for those of you who live in and around London. There is an amazing gentleman who probably a lot of you have not heard about, but you need to know about, a gentleman named Robear Musiah. He's an inventor, and as all good folks who enjoy 3D, a bit of an obsessive about the technology, to the point where he developed some really amazing things. So if we could bring up the next piece, I'll talk over this. He developed an incredible viewer that was called the Romo Viewer, kind of the equivalent to the Viewmaster in the States. It was a great way to bring 3D to the masses. So you can see here he's demonstrating his 3D viewer to President Vincent Ariel at a trade show. And it was, of course, a very popular item for sale in stores. But he, through the 50s and early 60s, took an amazing number of photographs. There are many, many thousands of 3D photographs, a few of which are on display at the Holborn Museum in Bath until the end of May. And I encourage you to go out there because that collection, thanks to Dr. Brian May and the generosity of others, is bringing some photography, 3D photography that the world has never seen outside of a very small circle of folks. And I'd like to thank Lizzie Jowett and her husband Ernest, who are here. I don't know if you can see him in the dark, but she's waving right here. This is her dad's work here. And her dad, Robear, was an amazing man because of his passion for all things 3D. Here, for example, is an interior of the Élysée Palace, the president's office, an inner sanctuary where probably not a lot of people had access, but to see it in 3D really kind of brings that room alive in a very interesting way. So when you see this collection at the Holborn Museum, you're going to see some amazing photographs of Pablo Picasso, which are unlike any others. This is a particularly great image. This was part of a series that was done, and this is just one of many that were done. But they had to require a special license for this sort of photography when it happened around 1960, because photographing nudes apparently was not the right thing to do. But it's a wonderful, whimsical series about 3D. And so hopefully this exhibit in Holborn is just kind of the tip of the iceberg. And again, thanks to Lizzie's generosity for making these images available to the world, you'll now get to see them. So I encourage you to go out there. And again, thanks to Dr. Brian May for making it possible for that to happen. Now, in the interest of time, I do have a very rare clip here that I'd like to show you. Now, in fact, it's a short. I'll show you the whole thing. So if anybody has to leave, it's about just under 16 minutes long. This is a film that was directed by Jules White, who is most known for directing all of the Three Stooges films. So this is a very rare Three Stooges film that was shot. It's one of 2 3D films that were shot with the Stooges. This is their 148th film. It was released in 1953, and it was followed by another film called Pardon My Backfire, which is their second and last 3D film. This particular one opened in front of a film called Fort Ty, which was a dramatization of Fort Ticonderoga and some of the battles that were happening there. And so this short opened that, and it met with such great success they did a second one. But anyway, this is from 1953. It's never been seen digitally, much as Ian had mentioned. A lot of this material has only existed in film, which makes it very difficult to show sometimes. So courtesy of the kind folks at Columbia Pictures, we bring you this particular clip. Now, one thing I should point out about this is I've produced a lot of 3D, and I've worked with a lot of great filmmakers on the storytelling aspect of 3D. And one day I met with the head of my boss at the time was the head of Sony Pictures, a woman named Amy Pascal. And she was interested in 3D, and she said, she pulled me aside one day, and she said, "What kind of product do you think we should be making in 3D?" And I said, "You need to be making comedies." And she said, "I don't get it." So I took her to a screening room, and I showed her Pardon My Backfire, the other of these 3D films. And just before the lights went down, she goes, "You know, I don't like the Three Stooges." And I said, "That's okay. Most women don't." But that's okay. So the lights went down. She watched it, and 2 minutes into it, she grabbed my arm, and she said, "I totally get it. I understand why comedy works in 3D." So this is 1953. It's a film called Spooks by the Three Stooges, and I hope you really enjoy it as much as I do. Thank you. Yeah, certainly.
Was that the original aspect ratio, or has it been reformatted?
It was slightly reformatted. It was originally a 1:3:3 aspect ratio, and for whatever reason, the studio decided to crop it a little bit. Has anybody seen that before? Yeah, it's there is a Three Stooges collection on DVD right now, but most of them are converted. They're actually not the original converted releases. So anyway, I'm glad you got a chance to see that. I know we ran a little long. Any questions for Ian or myself before you disappear? I do also want to take a minute to thank Betty Thayer, who was the person that introduced me to Lizzie and the collection, the Romo collection, which you have to see to be believed. It's unbelievable. It's pretty spectacular that we have access to see this stuff now, because many of these collections, as Ian can attest, often get cast to the winds, and you never see them again. They live in boxes for years until somebody eventually doesn't understand what it is and throws it away. And thankfully, we have curators of the past in people like Lizzie. So thank you for that. Anyway, we're around for I'm around. You're probably taking off. So, but we're around if you'd like to ask any other questions. But I'm glad you had a few moments to share history with us. As you can see, history is very important to both of us. So hope you enjoyed that, and have a great rest of your festival. And thanks to the guys upstairs. Thank you, Dom and Dan and Mark upstairs for making all this stuff happen.